US President Trump has sent the largest naval fleet into the Caribbean in decades, officially to wage war on drug smuggling boats. Critics say it's a flimsy pretext for regime change in Venezuela. Is the US heading for war with the South American country? I'm Hazem Sequera, and today's newsmaker is Venezuela. The US has been expanding military operations across Latin America for months now, deploying warships, jets and drones. It struck suspected drug smuggling vessels, killing at least 83 people the Trump administration calls narco-terrorists. And just a few days ago, President Donald Trump declared that Venezuelan airspace should be considered closed in the latest escalation of tensions. Speculation has been growing that this is all a prelude to an attack on Venezuela. But is this about combating the drug trade, or is it regime change by another name?
This is a boat that the US claims was involved in drug trafficking. Since September, Washington has blown up 24 of them in the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean, aiming to stop narcotics reaching American shores. President Trump says Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his close circle are running a drug trafficking network called the Cartel de los Soles. The White House designated it as a terrorist organization last month and has built up a massive military presence in the region. It's deployed 11 warships, including the world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, and amassed 15,000 troops. It's also reopened a naval base in Puerto Rico after more than 2 decades.
One would think either that capability is going to be used, or it's all sort of trying to demonstrate to President Maduro that it's either you leave the regime now and perhaps dictate some terms that are somewhat agreeable, or there will be a full-scale military operation to unseat you.
Maduro insists Washington's real goal is to remove him from power. His government denies the Cartel de los Soles even exists and accuses President Trump of fabricating a war. Caracas says the country's vast oil resources are also a target. The government has reached out to OPEC, requesting assistance to protect its reserves from the US. And Maduro remains defiant. He's held large public rallies, danced to a song calling for peace, and vowed that his country will not submit to what he calls a slave's peace.
We have lived through 22 weeks of an aggression that can be described as psychological terrorism. These 22 weeks have put us to the test, and the people of Venezuela have shown their love for their homeland. If 22 weeks ago we loved Venezuela, today we love her infinitely, and we are willing to continue defending her and to lead her down safe paths of peace.
Meanwhile, President Trump says he may soon use that massive military buildup to launch airstrikes on Venezuelan soil.
I want those boats taken out, and if we have to, we'll attack on land also, just like we attack on sea. And there's very little coming in by sea. I think we've knocked out over 90% of it.
The two leaders spoke by phone last month. Reports say Maduro told Trump he is willing to leave the country, with conditions including a global amnesty for him and his family. He also asked that an interim government be formed under his vice president before fresh elections. But after the 15-minute call, Trump rejected Maduro's requests. Many see Trump's renewed focus on Latin America as a revival of the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, President James Monroe warned Europe against interfering in the region, declaring it a US sphere of influence. Today, that rival power is China, now Latin America's largest trading partner.
Since the independence of the US and Latin American countries, maintaining absolute control over the region has been a core goal of the US. To achieve this, the US introduced the Monroe Doctrine and the Big Stick policy, creating a series of historical events. Today, these actions continue in the form of the US illegal blockade against Venezuela.
So whether Venezuela is next in a long line of US interventions appears to depend on how long Maduro can resist Trump's pressure and how far Washington is willing to go.
Well, joining me now to talk more about this are from Caracas, Venezuelan journalist and member of Mission Verdad think tank, Diego Sequera. From Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, Cuban-American commentator and spokesperson for the Cuban Democratic Directorate, Orlando Gutierrez Boronat. And joining us from Leeds in the UK, Professor of Humanities at the University of Leeds, Rebecca Jarman. Thanks very much for being all with us. Orlando, let me start with you. Is a conflict with Venezuela inevitable here? What's the end game for the US?
I think the end game for the U.S. is the return of sovereignty to the Venezuelan people, for an end to an illegal regime which holds power against the popular will of the Venezuelan people by suppressing their rights and their freedoms, and then to have a stable and secure Venezuela that can respond to its own citizens, that can end the terrible catastrophe of refugee flows from Venezuela, and also that can be an efficient partner in fighting against terrorism and drug trafficking.
When you say terrorism, are you saying narco-terrorism? In other words, drug trafficking?
I think in South America, terrorism and drug trafficking are intertwined at such a degree that it's very difficult to separate.
All right, I just
other.
wanted to be clear on that term, because I wanted to ask you as well that the figures show that Venezuela's involvement in what you call narco-terrorism and drug trafficking is quite small compared to other countries in the region. The U.S. Drug Enforcement report from 2020 says almost 3/4 of the cocaine reaching the U.S. is estimated to be trafficked via the Pacific, with just a small percentage coming via boats in the Caribbean. So is this really about drugs, would be my question.
Well, I think it's really about drugs. No one who knows the Caribbean, I'm here in the Dominican Republic now, a country that is being swamped by drugs, by drug trafficking, as is Puerto Rico, can say that there's not a huge drug flow from Venezuela through the Caribbean to the United States. That just goes against the facts of life here in the Caribbean where I'm at.
Diego Sequera, what do you think is going to happen here? Do you see a conflict, a larger conflict with the U.S. inevitable?
Well, first of all, this is about regime change. It has nothing to do. There's no track record of the U.S. concerning about any other country's sovereignty, and nevertheless, and well, currently the conflict is ramping up, but it's still, regardless of the whole buildup in the Caribbean, I think they still rely too much on what happens inside Venezuela right now in order to ensue this regime change. So we have to see what unfolds, what else unfolds this week. But it's still, at this point, regarding of all the grandstanding, they still rely immensely on what happens inside Venezuela. And currently, if you walk through Caracas, you're going to see that people are basically about their own business and more concerned about the holidays than even Armada are near our shores.
What do you say then, Diego, to those who argue that if this is about regime change, there are many people that will not be glad, that will not be mourning the end of the Maduro regime?
Well, to actually make the narrative fit, you have to rule out many things and many causes for what's going on. So I'm not going to delve into that. But regardless of what some people could perceive right now, even inside Venezuela, there's going to be it's a whole different ballgame once the U.S. it's deciding to intervene the way it does. Even with people that doesn't support Chavismo currently, that are not enthusiastic about the U.S. meddling directly, and especially in this form, in order to ensue some sort of regime change in Venezuela. So I think that's quite disputable. And already people in Latin America are not as happy as some people expect regarding the risk that this supposes, not only for Venezuela, but for the region as a whole.
Rebecca Jarman, what do you see happening here? Is this a case of who's going to blink first?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Diego. I think really it all will depend on what happens internally to Venezuela. Historically, the US has been fairly reticent to invade Latin American countries. They've used other means to exert their influence. They've exerted their influence by co-opting sections of the military, through assassinations, through taking power of certain industries, but not actually with boots on the ground. So Trump has clearly scaled up his strategy from sanctions, from dealing with the nation state, to kind of changing the conceptualization of Venezuelan government to now terrorists. This is a security issue. He's using kind of military bravado, but I think it would probably remain in the realm of bravado. It will depend if Maduro gets what he wants in negotiations. He's a very skilled negotiator. He's asked for a certain amount of demands which have not been met by Trump, and therefore he's refusing to go. I think if the right offer was put on the table, he would go.
Orlando, if the US decides to up the stakes here and begin limited strikes against Venezuela, would that not serve to turn ordinary Venezuelans against the US? Is there a risk that this could be counterproductive?
I think Venezuelans have voted in the voting booths. They've had their votes stolen from them. They voted by leaving the country. They want change. They want a return to democracy. And with regards to the US has a spotless record of returning sovereignty to the Latin American people. Without the US, the French would not have been kicked out of Mexico. The Spanish would not have ended their genocide in Cuba. Germany and Japan would still be dictatorships. The US, when it comes to world powers, has a great record of returning sovereignty to the people of the respective countries. And in the case of Panama, the US took out a brutal military dictatorship that was backed by the dictatorship in Cuba, and they returned sovereignty, full sovereignty, even over the canal, to the Panamanian people. So the spotless record of the US must be defended and advocated.
Diego, what do you say to that? Sovereignty, if this were to happen, sovereignty would be returned to the Venezuelan people.
Well, first of all, I mean, you can't, you're talking about 100 years references, talking about Mexico and talking about, I forgot the other reference, but also the same thing. They're talking about Cuba itself and how it had to be, it was annexed to Cuba through the Platinum Amendment. So I don't know exactly what sovereignty means in that sense. Also, also World War II, I mean, these are not exactly the best examples. You can talk about also the Dominican Republic in 1965. You can talk about Haitian history throughout the 20th century and also the 21st century for that matter. And also this is part, we got to this point precisely because all the other regime change attempts failed throughout the decade. So this ramp up also explains this. And mind you, this is also a Marco Rubio plan more than a Trump one. And I think that's also quite clear, regardless of what he has been saying so far.
Rebecca Jarman.
I think there's no...
Yep, sure. Is there any scenario you see where Maduro is forced to step down and go into exile?
Well, I think that the US will be reluctant to actually enact an invasion. It's not necessarily in US interest, and the US acts always in its own interests. I think that the popular base of Maduro will not support an invasion. Marco Rubio has a base which possibly would support an invasion, but I don't think it's big enough to justify that. So that leaves Maduro in actually quite a strong situation. I think he knows this. He's a very skilled negotiator. He has a lot of experience. He's been in power for 12 years now. And throughout that time, he has been involved with many different negotiations with many different entities, religious entities, political entities, military entities, on domestic scales, on international scales. So I think he is hedging his bets, and he is going to hold out until, as I say, he is offered a package, an exile package, which suits him. There are no known EU sanctions on Maduro currently, and so he may well be waiting for an offer to leave unharmed, to leave with immunity to any form of international legal proceedings against him, and to settle and retire comfortably in a country abroad. And if he's offered that, then that would be one way out.
I want to ask you as well, Rebecca, just looking at this more broadly, if we're heading back to because a lot of people have compared this to what's known as the Monroe Doctrine, which is named after the U.S. president in the 19th century, Monroe, who basically posited that the United States has a sphere of influence in that part of the world, in Latin America, and other powers should essentially stay out of the way. Is that what we're looking at here? Is that how Trump sees it? And the main threat in this day and age would be seen as China.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is trying to reassert power, reassert control and influence in the region that's often known as America's backyard. It can be quite embarrassing to see, for the US to see kind of other international powers have presence in the region. You've mentioned China. I mean, sure, China are present, but they're present more economically. They are major players in terms of the regional economies, in terms of the extractive industries. They have a significant population in different parts of Latin America. But I would argue that actually that the US government is a little bit more concerned with countries such as Iran and Russia that provide arms to Venezuela and other countries in the region. Russia, of course, had involvement in Cuba back in the 1960s and continues to exert some power, although less currently with the war on Ukraine. Their attentions have turned elsewhere. But certainly Trump wants to assert himself, assert his power, create a big spectacle about asserting himself and his power. And I suspect that also the temptation or the offering of a Nobel Peace Prize is something that he's also after as well. And therefore, anything he can do in quote unquote peaceful means to force regime change in Venezuela will be a goal that he pursues.
Diego, how do you view this? Is this about how America sees its spheres of influence in the region? Is this just sort of colonialism by another name?
Well, yes. I mean, this is another layer of the situation. There's, of course, something highly focused on Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution itself. But it's also about, I mean, it's even, you can see it in Project 2025, and you can see it throughout, by the way, Marco Rubio's legislative work and also his own op-eds. This is also about re-hemisphering, reshoring capitals, and making sure supply chains are workable for the current moment of the United States, which he's aware that it's in decline. So this translates itself also as getting out of the hemisphere the key players of the, let's call it multipolarity, or the Eurasian players, or the Asian century, which is part of the problem here. And this is one of the main reasons. This is one of the most important geopolitical reasons this is going on. First is Venezuela, then it's going to go further down the region if it's necessary, unless they are able to persuade other governments to follow suit, completely aligning with the U.S. strategic interests.
Orlando, what's your take on this and the idea that this is part of a larger geopolitical game that the U.S. is playing here?
I would have to ignore reality. I would have to live in the secondary illusion built by slogans that Maduro has propagated. The fact is that what was once Latin America's most stable and consolidated democracy, an oil-rich state, has over 1,000 political prisoners, has had the free press suppressed, has 9 million people, refugees who left. They don't count. They don't appear in our analysis. The fact is we're dealing with a region where most of the democratic governments have agreed that the Venezuelan people have a right to democracy, a right to freedom, a right for their electoral decisions to be respected by the Maduro regime. And this is a regime which has brought into the region players who are toxic to democracy in Latin America. I'm sitting in the Dominican Republic right now. This country is a success. It's not Dominicans flocking to Venezuela. It's Venezuelans flocking to the Dominican Republic. Why? Because this country has freedom. This country has a free press, open market economy. It has competing political parties. There's alternation in government. Aren't those the principles that Europe and the United States stand for? That is the reality. That's what we're facing. So I just participated in a regional summit here that ended yesterday. And there is great hope that Venezuela can recover its freedom, can recover its right to decide its own future.
Diego, what do you say to that?
Well, I can reply the same thing. I mean, why should I follow sleepless, late Cold War rhetoric regarding what's going on in the region, and also ruling out many complexities, and also important factors that have been also having a dramatic impact on the current economic situation in Venezuela. We've been under a very heavy sanctions program for 10 years already, which really undermined the economy and exploited Venezuela's weakness, because Venezuela, of course, was an overly reliant economy on oil, but it has bounced back already, and it has several years since at least 2022 it has able to tame its own inflation. It's one of the fastest growing economy currently on the hemisphere, and this is acknowledged by the UN. And also, the same thing you can say about the oil production. It has reached the 1 million barrel mark again monthly. So, of course, these are also pressing issues that need to be addressed from the U.S. perspective in order to ensure regime change, and not to expose the fact that not even sanctions were as successful as they expected to be.
Rebecca Jarman, does this fly in the face of America's stated policy under Trump of an America First policy, of not wanting to get involved in what he's called foreign wars? So if this was to escalate, then this would be another foreign war, wouldn't it?
Yes, but as I say, I don't think Trump intends to escalate the war. This is US first, because US always puts itself first, as do any country in their international policy. So I think that, as I've mentioned, it's unlikely that the US will escalate this any further. They're very aware that their popular base, that Trump's popular base, does not necessarily support further foreign investment in intervening in other countries. But they would gain financially from wielding further influence with regime change, especially because it would be possible to collapse all of the national services or nationalized services, oil, obviously, but other minerals, water, electricity, power, and rebuild infrastructural society from the bottom up with US interests, as the US has done in other parts of the world. So regime change would bring financial and political benefits to the US.
Orlando, what happens if Maduro essentially calls Trump's bluff here and bets on the fact that he may eventually just get tired of this confrontation and move on, and he's essentially just waiting Trump out here? Is that something that would concern you?
Well, there's two factors to answering your question. My premise is that Maduro is not a skilled negotiator and uses all kinds of unethical means to maintain himself in power and to make sure that the negotiating table is never even, is never inclusive. Number two, there's a big pressure on Maduro, and that's the dictatorship in Havana, which controls the Maduro government. It's a very dangerous regime. Maduro's bodyguards, his internal security circle is made up of Castro Cubans, and they have a big say in what Maduro does. And this is the same regime in Cuba that has sent 25,000 men to fight on the side of Russia against Ukraine. It's an interventionist armed regime which needs Venezuela desperately to stay in power. So you have to factor in the relationship between the Havana dictatorship and the Maduro regime, and the fact that Maduro himself is a graduate of the School for Training of Cuban Communist Party Leaders, the Nicolas Lopez School. So that's a factor that cannot be ignored in any analysis of what's going on in Venezuela.
Diego, I'm going to give what's probably going to be the last word on this to you. Is Maduro essentially going to try to just wait this out, and that this may be as far as things go?
Well, we have to wait and see. One thing is for sure, I'm not so positive about the fact that he's going to precisely give away sovereignty or the decisions of what's going on in the country for a foreign power, especially the United States. Also, there's no need for that childish description of being us Venezuelans and President Maduro himself as that over-reliant on Cuba, which is not, it's completely counterfactual, regardless of what they want to force them to see. It fits the narrative, of course, and it sells better than just engaging in a far more complex reality.
Why do you say this was childish rhetoric?
Because it's not true, basically. I mean, Venezuela's security doesn't rely on Cuba. Venezuela has its own security apparatus. It's very successful also, and it's been very effective. So it's pretty much, yeah, there he goes. Pretty much the same the same spin that we're going to see in order to justify the lack of entity for Venezuela.
Let's get Orlando's response to this very briefly.
Well, listen, I think I've been hearing slogans from Diego all morning long, and I haven't called them childish.
So
Because he's
have
not. He's
I,
an
by the
adult.
way.
He's an adult who chooses to say lies, to defend a
I'm in
dictatorship which
Venezuela,
oppresses
actually.
people. Diego, what
I'm
has
actually
the
in
security
Venezuela.
service of Maduro been effective at? Keeping a dictator in power? Stealing elections from the people? That's what the security service has been effective at?
Make
You're going to
people
deny
like
Fidel
you
Castro
fail
and
in
the
your
Castro
regime change
regime
attempts.
were
Make
intrinsic
people
to the
like you
Maduro and Chavez
fail
dictatorship?
constantly
You're going to deny that?
and
You're
also
interrupting
see
me. I'm a
through
free
your
man. You can't interrupt me.
net-funded rhetoric.
The days of your
You
dictatorship
rely
are
on
numbered.
net.
You can't
You're a
interrupt
US
people anymore.
operative.
Okay,
So you're
Diego,
not exactly
keep
in a
on
position
interrupting
to
me.
actually
You're
say
not a
something by
you're
your
not.
own
I'm a
mind.
free man. I don't live
You
under you.
rely
I don't live
on
under your
net
dictatorship.
to make
You can't
sense of
interrupt
your
me.
own
Gentlemen,
political
no one
career.
is being heard right now because we're all talking at the same
Well,
time.
sir,
And,
he began to speak
and,
over
and,
me.
and
I
unfortunately,
like to take
we
note.
could spend a lot
I
longer
have
talking
not
about this.
interrupted Mr. Diego.
We could spend a lot longer talking about this, but unfortunately, we're out of time
Yeah.
here. We want to thank all three of you for taking part: Diego Sequera, Orlando Gutierrez Boronat, and Rebecca Jarman. Thanks very much for being with us. And thank you, as always, for watching. Remember, you can follow us on social media and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Hazem Sika. We'll see you next time.